Good afternoon or good evening to everyone who is joining us. My name is Firuza Aripova. I am a lecturer of the Making of Modern History Global History class at the Cooper Union in New York City. And we are absolutely delighted to have our speaker with us, Marina Shevtsova, who is doing critical work, especially in the context of the current timeline and current events and particularly in light of Russian aggression in Ukraine. Marina Shevtsova is a senior postdoctoral FWO fellow at KU Leuven. She holds a PhD in political science from Humboldt University, Berlin, and is a Fulbright and a Swedish Institute alumna. Prior to starting her work at KU Leuven, she was an MSCA Co-Fund Utopia postdoctoral fellow at the University of Ljubljana, Slovenia. Marina is a co-founder of Equal Opportunities Platform, a Dnipro-based Ukrainian NGO working towards combating discrimination and promoting gender equality. In 2022, Marina received the Emma Goldman Award for her work as a feminist scholar and a human rights activist. Her research interests include LGBTQ rights and activism in Central and Eastern Europe, queer migration, and anti-gender movements. Her recent publications include an edited volume, Feminist Perspectives on Russia's War in Ukraine, Here Are Voices, which was published in February 2024 with Lexington Books. Marina, thank you so much first of all, for joining us and preparing this talk that I'm so much looking forward to. So we'll have about 40 minutes for your talk and followed by the Q&A that you all can leave in the Q&A box. So without further ado, Marina, the floor is yours, and Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава. Thank you so much. I'd like to thank, first of all, Davis Center for providing this space and giving voice to scholars from the region. Thank you so much, Firuza, for inviting me and for taking your time to moderate and facilitate the discussion. And thank you, everyone who joined us today, or to those who will be watching it later. I hope it will be interesting and helpful. And also, of course, please feel free to reach out via email if you have follow-up questions and you want to continue this discussion, because of course, the topic that I will be addressing today, or several topics, they are quite complex. It's quite difficult to put everything together in 40 minutes. So please, I'm also happy to address some issues in the Q&A and later. So without further ado, I wanted to start my talk with the key takeaway points that I'll be trying to make in these 45 minutes. And I decided to put them just in case, because I know that I tend to talk fast and to talk much. So just to sharpen the whole idea of what I want you to get from this conversation and what are points I'm trying to make. So there are 4 bullet points on the slide, I know, but I would read them as 3 key takeaways. So the first one is about the geopolitical component in the situation with gender and sexual equality, or gender and sexuality, or LGBTQ plus rights in Eastern Europe and Caucasus. And I will be talking today about a Ukrainian case in particular, and this is the case that I know the best, because both being Ukrainian, studying the country, but also being closely involved with many NGOs as a researcher, as consultant, as a volunteer, as project coordinator, as trainer, and as a friend. But many things here, they can be also applied to quite a few countries in the region, such as Georgia, for example, such as Moldova, such as Armenia, and also Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan. Of course, these all countries are very complex with their complex history and context, but there are certain trends that we can observe across the region due to geopolitical situation. And this has a huge impact on the situation with the condition of rights of LGBTQ plus community and people, activists, and organizations in those countries. Second point is that war, and I speak here about both the longer wars that started from the annexation of Crimea in 2014, but also full-scale invasion that kind of sharpened and highlighted the situation since 2022, is that, of course, as we already knew from feminist literature on war and military conflicts is that wars do result in retraditionalization. But also we see that a product of war can be emancipation and empowerment for specific groups. And in this case, for queer people, also for women, also for Roma people. And I will discuss this a little bit, this paradoxical situation, this parallel realities taking place now in Ukraine, where you have both. You have both increase of certain homophobic attitudes, certain violence in militarized society, the retraditionalization of gender roles, division of stereotypes, and so on, while at the same time you do have increased visibility, emancipation of, and improvement of the attitudes in society towards queer people. And finally, the third point, the most complex for me still the one I'm still trying to digest, to live through and to formulate better for myself, is these fragmented identities or complex identities that everyone has. Now, in the context of Ukrainian LGBTQ people and queer activists, there was certain expectation. I will be talking about that in the situation where, of course, the grievances of vulnerable groups are exacerbated, as usually during the war, there was certain expectation that there will be certain solidarity, such as feminist solidarity or queer solidarity, that will come to the forefront, and they will be larger or stronger than the other ones. Yet what we observe, and is that when it comes to existential war and the war of former empire and colonial state against a smaller country next to it, which challenges the whole existence of this colonial empire, then in this existential struggle, actually, national identities are the ones that are outweighing queer identity. And I will try to talk about this complex phenomena that I've been observing and feeling also through these 3.5 years. And yet, at the same time, while I will be problematizing it in my talk, I will also be saying or suggesting that it might be a good moment to again reconsider or review, revise the concept of nationalism. And of course, Ukraine won't be the first country or the first context in which it can be done, looking at other former colonies. But yet again, my call or appeal is to consider how can we rethink nationalist project or national sentiment in Ukrainian context, for example, as complex decolonial anti-imperial project, and see how it can be something that opens space for more inclusive, more plural notions of belonging, being part of the nation state or a political state as a project. Now, moving to my presentation per se and to the first part of it, I would like to talk about the geopolitics of LGBTQ rights in Ukraine and in the broader region. And on all the slides, you will notice, or on most of the slides, I try to also bring some additional reading suggestions where you could read more and in better ways what colleagues wrote about the topic, and sometimes what I wrote about the topic. And I also will have the last slide with the recommended readings where they will all be gathered together, so you can always go back to it in the recording or take a photo of the screen if this is something that could be relevant and interesting for you. So speaking of geopolitics of LGBTQ plus rights in Ukraine, it is important to say that the geographical location of Ukraine, as it is shown on the map, is of course, as probably most of you or every one of you understands, since you are here and you're probably interested in the topic, is crucial for this struggle, for the political competition, for the influence in the region. Ukraine is unluckily or luckily situated, depends from which perspective you look at it, between the European Union and Russia. And once Ukraine became an independent state, as well as many other newly independent states in the region, what the local political elites were trying to do, have been trying to do for years, was to continue to have this multi-vector foreign policy, or trying to please to big powers, West, or this imaginary West, of course, as many other players included in it, and Russia. And as you also will know, these wasn't such a successful project until since 2014. So Ukraine, as Georgia, as well as Moldova, as well as Armenia, were trying basically to keep those friendly relationship and to continue the connections and economic cooperation and everything with both sides. Yet what happened is that in 2013, 2014, you know that Russia then came up with the idea of a customs union. So preferential economic treatment where all those countries had to choose, could join this customs union to have preferential commerce or trade with Russia. Yet at the same time, there was a suggestion from the European Union for European partnership countries that had special treatment from the EU already, Eastern Partnership, Moldova, Ukraine, Armenia, Georgia. They were proposed to sign the Kazakhstan. They were proposed to. No, sorry, Kazakhstan was in the customs union. Apologies. They were proposed to sign association agreement, which was another economic preferential agreement offering the same preferential treatment during the commerce between the EU and, say, Ukraine or Moldova. But the problem with these two agreements was that they were mutually exclusive. So basically, at this situation, all these countries were put in the conditions where their governments had to choose. And of course, it was accompanied with certain pressure from both sides. And interestingly enough, or ironically enough, this is when LGBTQ rights in all those countries enter into the bigger picture. Again, in the broader scenario or in the broader picture, if we look at the same years, early 2010s, this is when the EU basically positions itself as the main defender of LGBTQ plus rights globally. This is when the EU adopts first documents that were called a toolkit to promote enjoyment of human rights by LGBTQ people in third countries. And this toolkit was first non-binding document, and then it was turned into the guidelines, which became a binding document for all EU offices and institutions abroad, by which all the people representing the EU in third countries were supposed to help to promote LGBTQ rights across the world. So what we were discussing with some colleagues and scholars within this conversation around geopolitical, political, and ideological shifts is that while the Cold War finished, this was a period which we could briefly call as a period of queer Cold Wars, so to say, or the Cold Wars that were covered with the ideology, with this clash of values, where on the one hand the EU promotes itself with the European values as the one who protects LGBTQ rights, while Russia, as opposed to that, starts with the laws to ban the so-called propaganda of non-traditional sexual relationships, but also starts attacks on feminist and queer community, and more importantly, starts also this aggressive informational campaign, propaganda campaign. And here is one of the posters from that campaign from 2013. This is a photo on the street of on one of the streets of Kiev, which says association with the EU means same-sex marriages. So this is when this whole debate basically with defining Europe as gay Europa, gay plus Europe started, when the whole discourse about the EU imposing homosexuality and then later trans rights on third country was initiated. Ironically and interestingly enough, this also created the momentum for queer community in countries that had developed relationships with the EU, such as Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, and later, since 2018, also Armenia, who changed the direction of foreign policy towards more pro-European after the Velvet Revolution in 2018. We see that that's where the activists started using this argument that being more tolerant, being more open towards LGBTQ rights is the sign of being European, sign of belonging. And this is a period in this 2014 until 2022 when we see the growth of the civil society in Ukraine, strong NGOization, slowly increased visibility of LGBTQ community, but also a lot of work of activists on the ground that was not that visible, such as work with educators, with schools, with psychologists, with police, with public institutions. And this is important to acknowledge here and to mention here for the later part of the argument. But of course, also Russia continued the strong informational campaign, and it was campaign, as you know, propaganda campaign on many levels. It was not only at the anecdotal level of horrible news presenters where they would tell anecdotal stories like Zelensky sending the battalion of gays to Donbass, or showing some pictures of the only open gay soldier in Ukrainian military at that point, and saying that the military is now following the EU rules and now everybody will become gay, so something completely absurd. But there were also more subtle levels with better prepared news, with more nuanced propaganda, which, as you know, culminated in the justification, actually, of the full-scale invasion in February 2022, but then also later by the need to protect traditional family values. And this also surprisingly, or not surprisingly, started changing the geopolitical climate, of course, in the region. I mean, full-scale invasion, not surprisingly, does so, but while the Russia was continued the full-scale war and militarization of its own society and attack in Ukraine, they also increased the attacks on local civil society. LGBTQ movement was declared extremist. There was attack on trans community. Trans people cannot do a transition anymore. This also was accompanied by solidarity with other conservative powers in the world. And this is the second factor that is very important, with the one that, on the one hand, just things to remember from the past to the situation now, that I want to carry from these first two slides to the next one. One is that we see in Ukraine, or we observe, if you look close enough, because as I said, it wasn't that visible probably, everyday work, a lot of work supported by the EU member states, but also by the US, and by the EU as a supranational actor also. This work with learning, with training, with educate, especially in education, especially with media also. A lot of work has been done with journalists to teach them how to write with correct terms about LGBTQ people, about sexuality, how to counter fake news. A lot of work with social workers, work with new generation of police. There was police academy opened in Kyiv following the example models of the American and Canadian and also Dutch police academies. And of course, there were classes about gender sensitivity, about LGBTQ rights. There were exchanges between police forces where the Ukrainian police officers could see actually that there is queer police marching in the Pride in Berlin or in Munich. So there were things like that. On the other hand, there is a shrinking space for queer people, for gender and sexual equality in the world. The backlash against gender and sexual equality in some EU member states, such as Hungary, Slovakia, such as Poland, of course, LGBTQI free zones. And the political leaders from there also are some closer friends, or at least, warmer feeling towards Putin than the others, which shaped, of course, the whole climate in which the situation for queer communities changed or developed during the full-scale war. Now, as I explained, I hope more or less, how these geopolitics and geopolitics of real power, political power, economic power also is connected to the geopolitics of the ideas about values and about certain ideology, so to say, regionally and globally. I wanted to move more specifically to what happened in Ukraine in terms of changes, or how gender roles, how ideas about gender and sexuality were affected or were influenced by the full-scale invasion and militarization, of course, inevitable militarization of the society and switch of the society in this defense mode, survival mode. On the one hand, so something that was indeed more predictable was this immediate retraditionalization, which found reflection in the whole idea of who is supposed to stay in the country and who is supposed to go, of course, to go to the front line to defend the country, and who was portrayed as those. So a lot of men volunteered to go to the military, but also, of course, there was and remains mandatory mobilization, conscription. Men were banned from leaving the country, then at the age from 18 to 60, with some exceptions due to health conditions or family composition. But it basically meant that men were, if not expected to go to the military, but at least to stay and wait until they will be called to go and join the military, while women were the ones who were allowed and encouraged in many cases to leave the country, to take kids with them, elderly people, people with disabilities, and so on. And this was also something, and remains until now, of course, with some improvement and changes yet. It is something that remains as the dominant picture in the media, in the dominant mood or attitude in the governmental discourse. At the same time, if we even look away from the discourses, from the pictures, from the media images, we see, of course, that in any case, women were the ones who took more certain burden of care during the war, also because a lot of care infrastructure was destroyed and is continued being destroyed, such as schools, such as houses for elderly, hospitals, kindergartens, also due to displacement of people, which means that all this burden was on the shoulders of women. At the same time, again, as it usually happens during wars, women had to take the places of men and do male job. Here it's in quotation marks, to replace missing workforce, without the acknowledgement that it creates again either double burden on them, because they also have to do a lot of free care work. There is certain reproductive pressure that is growing now in the society, with the expectations that women will be the ones who will have to create new generations. So we're going now in these practices when the clinics in Ukraine that Ukraine, as you might know, used to be one of the capitals or the centers of commercial surrogacy for the Western states and other countries across the world. So now that this service is disrupted, a lot of clinics providing the reproductive services, assisted reproduction services, they encourage women to freeze, or families freeze, the biological material for women to be able to bear children of the soldier or who does not come back potentially from the front line. And there are already first cases of such situations which are in a way kind of praised and romanticized in the media. Yet at the same time, of course, and also it might be important to also say that, of course, there is also pressure on men. So the men who try to escape the military, men who try to run abroad illegally, who are not ready immediately to defend the society, they are also seen as not worthy, as not good citizens, as the ones as the traitors. Yet at the same time, speaking of this momentum for emancipation, we see that, of course, first of all, women and queer people became much more visible within the military forces. And while it was not immediately acknowledged, because they have been there all the time, they have been there since 2014, and they were trying to raise their voices and claim their space, and especially bring the attention to the problems that they faced there, which inevitably they faced because military is not designed to accommodate women or people with non-heteronormative sexualities. Now with more women and queer people there, simply because we have now around 1 million people in the military. So proportionally, of course, or in absolute numbers, of course, you will have more women. We have now around 60,000 of women in different capacities who join the military. And we also have many more queer people who started to come out, showing their faces and claim their rights. And this is, of course, the momentum to when they, if you could say, enjoy, again, in quotation marks, enjoy certain visibility. And this is a momentum when they can try to, to gain certain rights and advocate for certain rights. And there is another reason for that. So it's not just simply visibility. What we see, of course, is what some scholars mark as, or where some scholars use the concept of homo-nationalism. Homo nationalism is a concept developed by Jasper Poir in 2007, and since then used a lot and stretched to different contexts. My position on that is it is not very much correct. Even using homo-nationalism as analytical frame, still it's not the best scenario to apply it directly to Ukrainian context. Instead, with my colleague Ramil Zamanov, with whom he studies queer people in Azeri military, we like to use the term homo-nationalist attempts. What do we mean here? So what is happening also now in this last 3.5 years, we observe this societal change. According to all surveys, sociological surveys, they have been conducted in the last 3 years, and they were commissioned every year by different NGOs to the Kyiv International Institute of Sociology. All the surveys show that there is definitely increase in societal support of equality for LGBTQ people. So the increase was from 34% that was measured in 2016 up to 60 plus, and now 70%, if I'm not mistaken, this year. What I want to say is that, of course, when we discuss why this support increased, of course, there is the visibility of LGBTQ people now in the military is there. There is also much higher support, or I would say it's significant difference. So if you see 70 people who support equal rights for LGBTQ people, then you see that more than 80% support the idea that LGBTQ people serve in the military and defend Ukraine. So more people are okay with people with queer community dying for them than just giving them equal rights. Yet this is only one factor. Second factor, of course, is the fact that Russia is very clearly homophobic and uses political homophobia as a very big instrument and tool to solidarize with conservative countries or conservative political elites also across the world, as opposed to West, symbolic West, trying to homosexualize other countries, but also, and of course, with the idea that the EU is this symbol of tolerance and inclusivity, which per se is also quite problematic. But I'm happy to talk about this later in Q&A. But I wanted to say that here I also see a big consequence of this work on the ground that has been conducted for years. And this is something that might not be mentioned that often, but still I do believe that even the whole tone, how the tone of journalists writing about this changed in last 10 years, not in the last 3 years, but in the last 10 years, the tone of programs on TV that are being made about this topic. This all change definitely also created, influenced the societal attitudes, the appearance in books about queer characters, and so on. Secondly, so this is one factor that created this momentum for additional advocacy for same-sex rights, for same-sex partners' rights. Secondly, of course, is this desire of government that Zelensky government, who got the candidacy for the European Union in 2022, there was this desire to show that Ukraine belongs to the Western club. And not surprisingly, to these visible steps, like organizing prides or appointing an American trans woman as a spokesperson for territorial defense forces, or signing Istanbul Convention. While the Istanbul Convention is, as you know, this is a document of the Council of Europe. This is a document that regulates at the international and national level, the prevention and combating of gender-based violence. So it is not document about LGBTQ rights at all, yet it has been framed like such. So there is a big opposition, and just yesterday, Latvia, for example, voted to withdraw from the Istanbul Convention. Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, Bulgaria didn't ratify the Istanbul Convention exactly because their conservative elites and churches are arguing that this is a document that will normalize homosexuality at schools. So the same perception existed in Ukraine, or was promoted in Ukraine by the church, and church since until today, since 2022, when the convention finally was ratified, church continues insisting on the fact that Ukraine should withdraw, should cancel ratification, and that this is a document that is against Christianity and values. And finally, I think it is also a very big symbolic gesture that the Ukrainian government made, is that in a martial law, in the time of martial law in Ukraine, when all the public events are or public gatherings, not public events, public gatherings are banned because of the security danger, right? It's also for the enemy. It is more, they are more likely to attack the situations where many people gather together, as Russia is famous for attacking civilians. Yet still, it's already the second year when Kiev Pride was allowed, of course, in a smaller scale and with all the precautions, security precautions. But I think that it is very telling that among in the whole situation, the government still at least is neutrally supportive, so it's not that they're openly pro. Zelensky never really explicitly said anything that about being pro same-sex partnerships or being inclusive. Yet allowing this, allowing state security forces to protect the march against the conservative groups trying to attack those. And also, just last week, if I'm not mistaken, or 2 weeks ago, a big international lesbian conference took place in Ukraine and Kiev, organized by Insight NGO, which is also, again, the fact that it is something that is allowed to happen, that is protected by the state security force, that is getting the permission. And this time is also shows that the government, despite the fact that of course, there is certain conservative turn of the US, so there is no much need to do, to signal to the US queer friendliness anymore, but still having the EU as the biggest supporter, at least symbolically, it is still important for the government to create this image of declaratory friendliness. And declaratory because if we look at the legal changes, the legislation changes, we see almost zero, except for the Istanbul Convention, which again is not LGBTQ friendly, or not like this. It's not document to advocate or to promote LGBTQ equality. Now, using this momentum, and momentum again is finishing because of this shrink in space, because of this conservative turn around the world. Of course, what queer communities doing is trying to advocate as much as possible their rights. And now two main directions in which the advocacy is going, and it is so to say, the joint decision of the professionalized community is to direct all efforts into one, advocating the bill for same-sex partnerships, so not yet full marriage, but partnerships, which excludes adoption, and second, to have a proper legislation on hate crimes, which is non-existent now in Ukraine. So homo and transphobic crimes are not properly criminalized in the country. So, which makes it very difficult to for police to make police or to push police into registering hate crimes as such, and to continue with the investigation, prosecution as it should be. Now, while it is it is something that could be seen as positive, right? That there is this momentum, and maybe, though I would say 2 years ago I was more positive or optimist about final legal change. It seemed that it was around the corner. Now, 2 years after, I'm not that sure anymore. What we see is this, what I call this unexpected solidarities, or this complicated situation of fragmented identities. And what happened in the first year of the full-scale invasion is that there was very big expectation voiced directly to many of us, feminist scholars, activists, LGBTQ activists, feminist activists from Ukraine. There was this expectation that there will be immediate solidarization with queer and feminist scholars and activists from Russia because we have a common problem. Well, it is a difficult topic to talk about, but I think it is something also that should be seen as a very multi-layered and very complex one. One is, of course, is that being an LGBTQ activist in a country like Russia, unfortunately, or anywhere else, does not necessarily mean that the person has reflected and has realized about the whole complex colonial history and the history of oppression that Ukraine and Russia have. So it's been already since 2014 when there were quite some conflicts between Ukrainian and Russian NGOs, or the so-called Russian-speaking NGOs abroad, bringing together refugees or representatives of queer community from both countries. And we saw the clear division because there was not unanimous position, or there was no clear, for example, condemnation of the fact that Crimea was annexed. There was often no acceptance or understanding of the fact why some queer Ukrainians would refuse to speak Russian, or why would choose English as a language of communication with other, say, refugees or people from community from Russia, rather than, speaking Russian. So I would say that this the reflection or reflexivity and acknowledgement of the colonial past, of the situation, of the unequal distribution of resources between countries was one of the main reasons why this solidarity didn't happen automatically. Having said that, it doesn't mean that it doesn't happen at all. We do have examples of cooperation, of support, of joint projects, and so on. However, usually those are happening from the previously existing cooperations, or usually it happens with people who already were quite vocal and quite open to learning and to seeing more Ukrainian perspective, or perspective of people from other countries. Now, at the same time, it is important to say that for some people who remained in Ukraine, for queer people in Ukraine, people who go to the military and who fight in the front line, of course, the way how they live through this nationalist or national sentiment is very different from those who have privilege to stay abroad, or those who who can safely travel and who do not need to survive and fight for their lives every day. I was at this presentation about queer military here in Belgium at one university, and we had a direct Zoom call with a representative of queer military in Ukraine, from Ukraine. And so he spoke a little bit about his work, about his service in the military, and how it's been going. And then the first question that he received was from the public. It was, so we are very curious. So what kind of collaborations, what kind of joint projects do you have maybe with Russian LGBTQ people? And I was translating there. So when I translated the question, the answer was really striking. So the speaker, this queer soldier, he was first really shocked by the question, and then he said, I serve in Ukrainian military and I don't collaborate with the enemy. And I think this is something, and in the papers that I cite on the previous slide by Ivan Shmatko and Daphna Rachok, Parallel Identities, LGBTQ Soldiers and the Russian Invasion of Ukraine, they do quote quite a few interviews from people who are in the front line, who they traveled to, because Daphna and Ivan volunteered a lot, and they spent a lot of time in different parts of Ukraine, especially during the first year of full-scale invasion. That's what comes across in many interviews, that people who joined the army, there was certain hypothesis or expectation that queer people joining the army or being in the military are there because they are queer, and because they kind of are fighting for LGBTQ rights, or because they fight Russia because Russia is not LGBTQ friendly. And it is interesting because it speaks a bit or a lot to the position also of Ukrainian queer people at Euromaidan, who chose then, and there is Tamara Marcenyuk's work about that that I referred to in the beginning, who chose to stay invisible in the Euromaidan protests, also because of Russian provocations, because Russia was associating this Euromaidan revolution with the imposition of homosexuality. But the main idea is that then and also now, at least how they voice it, they say, no, first we have to fight for the independence of a country, we have to fight for territorial integrity of our country, and once it is there, once we got it, next we will talk about the other things. So I'm first Ukrainian and then I'm queer. Now, of course, and this is one position. At the same time, you have this second group of people who choose to exactly use their position in the military, and here I talk about the advocacy of LGBTQ rights based largely on participation of queer people in the military. So we have now media campaigns that are very explicit about the connection between being ready to die for your country and deserving your rights. And this is how the whole campaign is framed. There are photos of lesbian, gay, or trans queer soldiers who say things like, I'm ready to die for my country and I just want equal rights. Or, we are here, but yet my country doesn't see me. So things like that with very direct connection. So that now that we are there and we are ready to die, we deserve the rights, which of course is very efficient on the one hand message. And at the same time, that's why also we call it with Ramil the homo nationalist attempt. It's basically attempt to show yourself to your state as deserving of the citizenship rights that should come with the citizenship automatically. But this is also through certain exclusion, right? This is through the exclusion of those people who are not ready to fight, who maybe ran the country, fled the country for legitimate reason, of course, for the reason of being afraid to die, or also people who might be non-fitting into this image of good, deserving citizen who volunteers, who is ready to be in territorial defense, or if not, at least to fundraise, or at least to advocate elsewhere. So this comes across as this message that you have to, as somebody who is already non-heterosexual, non-cisgender, you have to do something special to deserve the universal rights that are not that universal. And the last, even more complicating the situation layer, of course, is certain alliances that we have been observing during this time, during these years, and they're running in parallel with like one thing that at a certain point went down in Ukraine was we had a couple of years after COVID. So first COVID was the period, of course, when there were less attacks from right-wing groups, but this is also clear. It is easy to explain because there were no events. People were sitting at home, quarantined. But then there was period in 2022, 2023, when homo and transphobic violence in Ukraine went down. And we were talking about possible reasons about that. And of course, one reason was that quite a few people went to the military, of those who might be the ones who would like to be more aggressive towards the minority. Second reason was the hope that maybe societal attitude changed indeed. So maybe people are really more friendly. And finally, of course, there was this not irrational fear that if you attack an event and you are arrested, then there are more chances, rumor has it, that you will be sent to the military. So if you are not in the military and you don't want to be sent there, you don't do anything that might violate the law and might bring you in trouble with police. And of course, there were also fewer events. So that's another reason during the war. So all this created this more peaceful in terms of local attacks on LGBTQ rights situation. Yet what we see already in 2024, starting from second half and this year, 2025, we see that again, new right-wing radical groups are on the rise. So this one on the picture, this is the protest during Kyiv Pride Festival this year. And this is the organization that Shit Traditsy, doesn't matter, something about the traditions that it wasn't there before. And these are young people, so you see on the picture they're quite young, and this is a youth group that is extremely radical and aggressive. There is also now youth part of right sector. So this is one part, and that's also to be debated how they are being funded, for example, how who helps them, and why are they now unexpectedly active with all this printed production and merchandise and everything. And at the same time, there are also other nationalist groups who are not not radical right wing, rather right leaning. And then we observe that there are actually quite some alliances and solidarities between these groups and LGBTQ activists, such as fundraising for them, being on the front line, or just certain collaborations and cooperation. And this is something again that we observed already during Euromaidan revolution, when the Euromaidan camp was pretty much protected by right-wing groups. And again, when you look at right-wing groups, there is a whole spectrum of different kind of characters and tonalities and position towards LGBTQI people. But apparently, those alliances can be formed and are being formed when there is a common enemy and there is a common interest, unless they are really radically on the different side of spectrum. Now, to finalize and to wrap it up, just certain finishing words about this third takeaway is that I think that these three or four complex dynamics, or this mess in a way that we observe, ideological, and this is just a surface, that I scratched. They do reflect certain colonial legacies and activism that we have in the region. Where I was talking about the distribution of resources, and this is something also to look closer at. For example, now in the countries like Georgia, like Kazakhstan, like Armenia, and these are the countries where a lot of Russian queer organizations and activists were relocating or displaced from Russia during these three wars. And now the dynamic of activism, of organizations, of relations, of certain local tensions is very complex, and how it is negotiated, how the space is being revisited and relived is something that we need to keep an eye on and to understand better. At the same time, I want to say that, of course, Ukrainian nationalism remains this big word which is being used a lot by Russia in Russian campaigns justifying the war, but also it has certain appeal for the Western media, for the Western scholars. I'm always getting these questions about Ukrainian nationalism, and it's very difficult to explain to someone who doesn't know the years of Ukrainian history which should be this decolonial reading of Ukrainian nationalism. Because on the one hand, indeed, there are certain problematic things that need to be problematized, that we need to see critically with this critical feminist friendship. We need to be cautious of, reflective about, and we need to fix them. While on the other hand, some of them are quite natural and maybe logical and necessary, such as, for example, the desire of people to speak their language, or to switch to stick to Ukrainian or English. That are sometimes seen as radical or unwillingness to share a panel, for example, with somebody from Russia, or to engage in certain dialogue or cooperation that I suspect they would have been read differently if it was some other country, not the country with the reputation of this radical nationalism that has been curated and created by Russia for years for Ukraine. And this propaganda continues. It continues in different languages and so on. So, right. So my last call, and I'm finishing on that, is indeed to try to, which is not easy, to move to those beyond those binaries of nationalism and queerness, of how they can be or cannot be lived together or felt together or combined in oneself as identity, and see how indeed this anti-imperial struggle, as Ukrainian one, but also the one in broader region, how it can reshape queer politics in wartime context. Here is the recommended reading, as I promised. So it will be there on YouTube available. And thank you very much for your attention. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Marina, for such an insightful and thought-provoking presentation. We have a question from Janet Johnson. I'm going to read it out loud. So this just happened in Latvia, the rejection of the Istanbul Convention, only 2 years after ratification. It just happened so that it might be impossible to discuss yet, but I'd appreciate if Marina has any thoughts on it. I see it as connected to gender, LGBTQ rights, and Russia sentiment, and surprising and important as Latvia has also been in this paradox of emancipation after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine and a key ally of Ukraine. And similarly, I saw multiple images posted by Mozaika, a Latvian LGBTQ organization. There's sort of this call. There was this mass protest in Riga. There was apparently signatures of 22,000 citizens, Latvian citizens, that signed in protest of withdrawal. And yet, nonetheless, what are your thoughts, Marina, on this latest event? Tragic event, I should say.
No, yeah, it is extremely upsetting. I mean, already when Turkey withdrew from Istanbul Convention several years ago, it was. I mean, we see where Turkey has been going, but still, it was sad and ironic in a way that Istanbul Convention now is not in Istanbul anymore. But I think what we see in Latvia, I was also very upset this morning when I read about it, is that unfortunately the something that I deleted from the presentation because it was already, you see, I already went over 40 minutes time. I wanted to map to suggest mapping the so-called anti-gender actors in Ukraine, because I don't like the word maybe anti-gender. I just use it as umbrella term, because in Ukraine, this resistance against LGBTQ rights and gender and sexual equality for years didn't really mention gender ideology, which gender movements or anti-gender actors do, but now they picked it up too. So I think it's fair enough to call them this way. And on this map, on the one hand, of course, I would put the Orthodox Church as one of the main ones, but and then of course the pro-Russian groups, now secretly pro-Russian groups. So now you can't be an openly pro-Russian group in the country. But another very important actor or actors are the groups funded from the US, and those are these. Religious organizations that, well, they do define, I think they're like evangelicals or something like that, but they're also very important. And this is something also not to disregard, not to blame everything on Russia. They, for example, were the authors of first bill to ban propaganda of homosexuality in Ukraine, and it was a very well written bill. They really worked on it, and they organized these family marches. They organized this whole concert halls to support these ideas against abortion, against homosexuality. So I think, and also, and there are also these so-called right-wing groups or nationalist groups who somehow, being against Russia, or at least they claim so, are against Putin, are very much against everything LGBTQ and Istanbul Convention. And I think Latvia might be following the same scenario that we also observe, I mean, in Poland and in Hungary, where all these actors are very successful, having this now huge support from basically two world superpowers, Russia and the US conservatives. And unfortunately, now with these trends that the EU is observing, with many countries turning more conservative, it is not anymore this argument that used to work for Ukraine, that you have to be progressive to be a part of EU. It doesn't work in those countries anymore, because clearly you can be part of the EU and still withdraw from Istanbul Convention. You can be a part of the EU and still ban transition for trans people, as Hungary. And nobody will do anything to you. So I think those groups now are thriving, as in accordance with all the literature about political homophobia, while you have the combination of anti-gender actors and elites who have the same idea of common enemy. Then the things are very bad for queers, but also for women and for other vulnerable or marginalized groups and minorities.
Thank you so much, Marina. I wonder if we have any questions. Again, please feel free to type them in the Q&A box. Uh, Marina, my sort of question was, and you've mentioned that, so there was a huge connection by these evangelical, like US evangelicals to Ukraine. As you mentioned, there were these open stadiums, concerts, and again, sort of call against abortion and LGBTQ rights. What it's been like since the war started? Has it decreased? Has it increased? Perhaps you could elaborate on that.
Yes, they unfortunately they didn't go anywhere. So of course there are fewer opportunities for them to get to make these big public gatherings, but still the how you call them, the houses of prayer. I mean, they're working, so the religious institutions are working, and they are kind of religious institutions. So they're going there. But also, what happened during COVID, which what helped them right during COVID, and what helps us now today is this digitalization. So they moved successfully also online, and they also became more successful in their online technologies. So what we see is the production of a lot of websites, a lot of so-called educational material for YouTube, for TikTok, for Instagram, creation of different groups, channels where they, promote these ideas about anti LGBTQ, especially very much anti-trans. When Trump started his term with saying that there are only two genders, they were ecstatic. It was like for them a big present. Um, but also they produce textbooks for schools, so they try to make the classes on traditional values mandatory. Luckily, they haven't done so yet, but they are elected courses like this in schools, and teachers get these very nice published books. They are trained how to give these classes. So if the school is tiny bit more traditional, or this is in more religious traditional area, it is very easy to enter there and to convince parents that this is what their children need. It's also a certain political capital, so they engage a lot with some politicians who still try to ride this gender horse. Like, for example, Yulia Tymoshenko, who never was anti-gender, anti-LGBTQ last several years. She went completely active, and she's now talking about the threat of gender, about parent one and parent two, how the West will, turn everybody trans and homosexual. And very simple reason for that is that her electorate were elderly people, and this part of population is shrinking. So now she tries to get to the conservative groups. And there are a couple of other less famous politicians who are doing the same. You see in some local administrations, sometimes they produce a bill to ban propaganda of homosexuality, even though it's not within the authority of this region. Ukraine is it's not a federal state. You cannot do something like this on the level of oblast. And I think they know this very well, but it gives just them, the reason to, oh, look, we did this bill. We are really working. So yeah, it's not going anywhere. But I think also what now happens, again, probably everywhere, is that social media is so, you like the things and you add friends, those who share your opinion. So most of the time many of my friends and colleagues we don't see that, because you have this rainbow news feed of Facebook and Instagram, and then you step out a little bit, or you follow some comments, or you go to specific channels, and you see how active those groups still are, and they're really not calming down. So it's really something we have to keep an eye on.
Thank you, Marina. There's a question from Rochelle Rothschild. Thanks for this very informative talk. Is the association of anti-LGBTQ legislation and propaganda with Russia and Putin a plus in Ukraine, or it doesn't matter that much?
Mm-hmm. Um, I think it is. It is definitely a plus in a way, but it's not such a big plus. Let's say like this: people for whom it mattered, they switched already. So it was used very much to advocate for LGBTQ rights since Euromaidan. So I would say that the people for whom this argument worked, it worked then, and then also in the beginning of the full-scale invasion. But now, of course, with the time, it's kind of it might not matter that much anymore. And secondly, the problem is that some radical groups, radical nationalist groups, they do promote this nationalist rhetoric, saying that you can be nationalist and still anti-LGBTQ, and that you don't have to follow neither. And it's not because Putin thinks so, and maybe Putin sometimes can have some smart ideas like this one. So unfortunately, you have these two. So it definitely is a factor, and it helps also at the symbolic level, at the level of advocating something in the government. But it's not enough, apparently, for government to completely switch. They never, as I said, all the major politicians, they never took a risk to say openly that, yeah, I support LGBTQ equality, which is, for me, concerning.
Thank you, Marina. The next question is from Valerie Sperling. Looking ahead, what factors do you think would promote ongoing increased tolerance for the LGBTQ plus community in Ukraine, and what factors would promote intolerance?
Yeah, I have thought and I've been thinking a lot about this, and my answer is always the same. I think that what would really, really, really help is the support from the side of well, also government ideally, but say donors and international organizations, exactly for the things that are not that visible, such as what I was mentioning before, education, working with educators, with schools, working with police, working with the courts, working with social workers, and so on. So with all different groups of population, providing support to parents, providing support with doctors, right, to with students who then work in these professions such as endocrinologists, psychiatrists, but also GPs. It's very difficult in smaller cities to find a trans-friendly GP. The problem is that donors, and this is something that I think is not helpful, maybe it's not promoting not tolerance, but most donors are really obsessed with these projects that are quick, visible, such as organizing a party, pride parade, festival, conference. Then they put it on the report. It's very clear. There is clear output. Okay, I don't know, 200 people has attended. We gave out 500 flyers. We made a movie screening. This is all good. But the people who will be coming to these events are still at this certain self-selection. And in the situation of Ukraine, it will be the same people. We have already enough people to attend those events. So it's not promoting long-term change and sustainable change. Donors don't like these long-term projects. They think that the education is the part of responsibility of the government, that this is something that the state should should have taken care of themselves. But I think I'd love them to revisit this point of view, because for government to do that, they would have to then interfere really into internal politics, to pressure on the government, which is probably not okay.
Thank you, Marina. The next question by Tatiana Stebneva. Thank you very much for your insightful talk, Marina. In a context of the growing attacks on LGBTQ plus rights in the West, do you think LGBTQ plus rights are becoming less of a geopolitical issue in Ukraine?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think yes and no. I think yes, in terms of being able to use those this geopolitical association for advocacy. Unfortunately, as I was saying, the momentum is being gone, so to say, exactly because of that, because of the turn in the US, because of the situation in Eastern Europe. Unfortunately, I think, and I think this is one of the reasons why we don't see much progress now on the level of the government, while government is blocking these same-sex partnership bills and so on, even though in private conversations, a lot of politicians say that they have nothing against LGBTQ people and they're very friendly. And if they go to Europe, they're super friendly, and then they tell how they are tolerant and so on. But I think for the advocacy, it's been a loss. At the same time, surprisingly, it's not that it's not losing its importance in Russia's propaganda, for example, and we could observe that very clearly now in elections in Moldova and in Georgia. And of course, this is not in Ukraine, but I think these are two very important countries now, both for Ukraine and for Europe and for Russia. And this is why Russia invests so much money. I was just 2 weeks ago at a talk, 3 weeks ago, just a week before the elections in Moldova. We had a talk of the Moldova ambassador here in Brussels, and she was telling about huge pressures that they experience with cryptocurrencies being brought to the country, with suitcases full of money to basically to discredit the Sandu's government and Sandu's party. And a lot of news, of fake news being published during the weeks prior to elections were related to LGBTQ people, claiming that Maya Sandu bought sperm from Ricky Martin and Neil Patrick Harris and Elton John, and she used budget money to do that, and she brought this celebrity sperm, gay sperm, to Moldova. Or that the government made obligatory LGBTQ policies in schools, and they created these photos with pictures allegedly on the walls of Moldovan schools in Chisinau. So it was very stand-in, and also like attacks on the community. Similarly, in Georgia, now that the protests are going for 300 plus days against Georgian Dream, the Georgian Dream is very explicit in calling protesters queers or gays, and making the attacks against LGBTQ community and banning LGBTQ propaganda. So I think, unfortunately, Russia is not going to drop it. So there the geopolitical component unfortunately remains.
Thank you, Marina. My question to you was regarding the colonial legacies of activism, and I think both of us, we've talked about it extensively. What are some of the practical tools, in your opinion, to sort of direct the activists to rethink the Russian colonial legacy and to reassess it, to sort of keep the conversation moving? And again, that's something sort of I struggle with as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for this question. I think, unfortunately, as with radical homophobes, which is maybe a bad comparison, but it's a very clear one, we always say, when we advocate, that you have the part that is already convinced, then we don't need to preach for the converted. Then you have these hesitant ones, and we work with them. And then there are radical homophobes, and let them be, because it's not worth the effort. So I think, unfortunately, if the other side is not ready to sit and listen and talk to you, then we cannot redirect them. And I do observe this sometimes, and understand it also comes from traumatized place. I see that many activists, of course, they escaped horrible conditions back home, and they do expect sympathy, but they don't have, and I don't know what it is, resource or capacity to understand that it might be something else that does not allow the other side to sympathize fully, or you had this conversation that was saying that often this Russian relocated activism in new countries like in Armenia and Georgia goes very in parallel with the local activism. And then I hear from activists that, but why they don't want to cooperate with us, they don't want to talk to us. And I never heard from those a question, and what maybe I have done wrong that they don't want to talk to us, or maybe I approach them differently. Maybe what could be my part in this? Of course, this is mutual mistrust and mutual cautiousness, but I do feel that there is this group of people, which is not applied to everyone, who really refuse to acknowledge the fact that yes, they are definitely victims and survivors of Putin's regime, which is all true, but it doesn't mean that they cannot reproduce certain practices. And I think the horrible example that we also observe in the world is the Israeli-Gaza conflict, right? You can be from a very oppressed minority, suffer a lot, and then do similar things to another oppressed minority. And it's for some it is for some reason easy to recognize and reflect and to discuss and acknowledge, but for others sometimes they're so into their own trauma that they don't want to see the trauma of other person.
Thank you so much, Marina. We don't have any more questions, but perhaps you would like to offer sort of last minute reflections if you have.
Um, No, I just want to say that thank you so much for inviting me and for providing me this, let's say, platform, this space and time to talk to you. And I hope we have more indeed conversations between, yeah, between different groups, between different contexts, because I also sometimes feel that us as yeah, former Soviet region, which I don't like to call like this, but for the sake of geography, yeah, this Eurasia, we are somehow boiled in our own context, which feels for us very self-explanatory. Even though we cannot, we just talk with you, that we cannot understand each other that well sometimes. But I hope we will have also some space to talk across other contexts, with countries in Latin America or in Africa and Asia, and to see, like for Southeast Asia, because when I meet some activists from there and we talk about their and our struggles, it seems that we have a lot in common and we have much more to talk to each other about than with some colleagues from German university or Belgian university, and we understand each other much better. But unfortunately, right, due to limited resources and yeah, the institutionalized practices, we don't have that much opportunities to do so. So I think this is my wish that I try to manifest to the universe to have more spaces and places for that.
Thank you so much, Marina. And thank you, and thank you to all the Ukrainian scholars that have produced such, again, critical and important work and under such tragic circumstances. So I'm immensely grateful for the literature that you provided, and again, immense gratitude to all of you to continue writing and being the voice in the midst of the war. So thank you so much who joined us for this, again,
Yes, thank you so
thought-provoking.
much.
Grateful to all of you who joined us and for all of the questions. And Marina, peace to all of you. I think we're all praying for that.
Thank
So,
you.
yeah. All right.
Thank you.
I think there's one more second. Yeah, everybody's thanking you, Marina. And
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for staying with us and for listening and for your questions and comments. Thanks so
yeah,
much.
and I really hope that there's going to be more discussion of the sort in the future, but whether at the Davis